former practicing lawyer, I know how difficult it is to get the same sort of paperwork in front of different people. And it seems like, Byron, politicians have exactly the same problems as we do.
Yeah, so this is the news, according to Helen Zille, that Floyd Shivambu is the actual individual who is responsible for the multi-party charter, government of national unity, whatever we have. You know, that coalition with the DA. Yeah, Floyd's responsible for it. Because according to Helen, during the parliamentary caucus, where they were all debating on who's going to do what, for those of you who have been watching the news, they were negotiating their agreements all the way until, well, right then. And then Floyd came up with this crazy idea that he was going to go out there and do a caucus and ask everybody who they should put up as a nomination. And during that caucus, the ANC and the DS signed their agreement. So arguably, if Floyd hadn't done that, hadn't been a puss, the agreement would have never got done, and we wouldn't have had a government of national unity. So, thanks, Floyd.
I mean, South Africa has this crazy law or regulation that says once the election results are done, you have 14 days to form a new government, which is absolutely insane. How the hell are you supposed to get a coalition together from various parties within 14 days? It's insane. It just cannot be done. So that's why for the Government of National Unity, we have this document, which sort of gives broad brushstrokes about what people want, but lacks the detail, of course, because it's only been 14 days. And what Helen Zille is saying is that if there wasn't a break in the proceedings at the first sitting of Parliament before the nomination of the Speaker, it could have been a real shit show. Who knows who would have voted for who? There was no agreement in place. There was no signed on the dotted line. So it would have been total and utter anarchy. We could have had bloody Floyd Shivambu himself as Speaker of Parliament. But thanks to him, when he annoyed Justice Zondo and said, listen, we need 30 minutes to caucus with the Progressive Alliance, i.e. all the shit parties that are communists, he gave the DA and the ANC a chance to actually just sign the document right there and saved, for now, the future of South Africa. So I'm not too sure if he was paid to do this, but whatever the case might be, just Malema, how do you feel now? Your best friend screwed you, inadvertently, maybe.
For those of you who were closely monitoring the news, you would have noticed that obviously Helen came out there and said to us that this agreement had been very difficult to get over the line. Now, obviously, with the 14 days that they were given, in the South African context, that became very difficult because we all saw the news, right? The ANC basically fought with itself over the longest time on, had it actually lost the election? They weren't sure. And then all the alliance partners came out and said, we could never work with the DA because, you know, they're white racists, whatever other rubbish. And the ANC itself got really schizo with how it was actually going to manage a coalition agreement. But only in the last moments when it actually realized, actually, we've lost an election and we should probably be pragmatic, did they actually sit down and agree a framework which they could use to go forward. Now, you see, Ramon, going forward, coalition governments in South Africa are going to become the norm. And if parties are constantly schizo, the minute they lose an election and they're like, oh, well, we don't know what next, 14 days is never going to be enough. Because 14 days are going to mean that you've got to negotiate, you've got to first come to terms with the fact that you lost. Then you've got to figure out, what are we doing with our own leadership? Are we getting rid of the leadership or replacing or putting in new leadership? If we are staying there, who do we alliance with? And do they actually want to alliance with us? Because it's all good and fine for everybody in the media to say, well, the DA would go into government with the ANC, but the DA had to agree that with itself. So they needed to caucus too. Once you have everything agreed, you then got to agree on the terms that everybody's going to follow, which may make or break the agreement. Fundamentally, the upshot of all of this is that 14 days is not enough in the current electoral context, which is why the current suggestions are that the time frame through which that they need to form a government will need to be amended to reflect a future South Africa where coalition governments are the norm.
I hear you, and I think 14 days is ludicrous. But on the other hand, when you have the EFF and MK coming in and making the most, let's just say, retarded demands, like basically the EFF came and said, we want to be ministers of finance, we want to be head of the finance portfolios in every single place, that we will rule together with the ANC, etc., etc. And why is that? Well, because the EFF steals the most money. If you control finance, you control all the money in that particular department or province or state, for that matter, which is why they wanted Floyd Shivambu to be Minister of Finance, even though he has like a PhD in sort of communist nonsense for the most part. The magic money tree economics, it's not a long-term strategy for this country or anyone else. But interestingly, Byron, speaking about finance, The 14 days didn't allow the EFF to get over their arrogance, which is very, very good. However, what we have seen, though, is the first fruits of the Government of National Unity happening in KZN. I sent you the list earlier. The DA are going to hold the portfolios of finance and public works in KZN, which is absolutely massive. The ANC, meanwhile, have like tourism and stuff like that. really crappy portfolios. So even though we only had 14 days to make this a reality, it is becoming a reality in KZN, notably because the ANC collapse in that province has been very abrupt.
Yeah, so we discussed this earlier, right? And the biggest issue that you have with the DA and finance in that area is that the finance was already given out as a portfolio, was given to the EFF. So arguably the ANC is already used to not having finance in that area. It was the EFF portfolio. It's also going to be the hardest portfolio to fix because of the EFF portfolio, one that was screwed. So if you look at it to a degree, it's kind of like it makes sense that you'll kind of give out that portfolio. With that being said, I'm reminded of something because you are referencing the communists, in which case I will quote the father of communism, and that's Karl Marx, who once said, "All that is solid melts into the air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with somber senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind." Now, this line out of the Communist Manifesto is actually quite a decent line. You know why, Ramon? Because they finally have to understand where they fit in terms of national government. And what we're seeing is that, as the DA says, they get things done. And as we all know, with the EFF, they steal the fiscus drop. So it's logical that the DA would take those positions. What's not logical is how the EFF is actually dealing with this. And so I'm reminded of something, Ramon. According to the EFF, they are now the official opposition in South Africa. And according to them, their progressive alliance with the other sore losers that couldn't actually fit into the old coalition agreement for reasons, and MK, although we're not actually 100% sure on what the situation with MK is, are all doing this progressive alliance to be the official opposition in government. Because according to them, the DA can no longer be the official opposition because they are actually in government. That's actually not untrue, now is it?
No, that is the interesting part of all this. Thanks to the Government of National Unity, the official opposition are literally the communists, right? The communists and MK, which are sort of pseudo nationalists but very communist in terms of fiscus and financial things, are the opposition. And Action SA, shame, Action SA didn't want to be formed part of anything because they got 3 seats and were butthurt about it. And I don't know, now they want to cancel another host for some reason. But anyway, Action SA doesn't really matter. They got 2% of the vote. We're only speaking about real parties here who got more than 2% of the vote. But these people, by forming the Progressive Alliance, which is a third of Parliament, a third of the seats in the National Assembly, are now the official opposition, and I absolutely agree with that statement. However, what is interesting is that the official opposition are retarded. So, it's time for a change, maybe, whereby the government is not retarded and the official opposition is. So that's a good turn of phrase, I suppose.
Yeah, it's actually quite nice because, as Cole said, and I'm going to repeat that line, all that is holy is profaned. Karl Marx hated anything that was sacred in the state. He hated anything that was sacred in life. He just seemed to just hate everybody. And for the longest time, the people that hate and are the most useless individuals have actually been our national government. I don't think anybody disputes that. But now it's the official opposition. Who cares what they do, eh? It makes a nice change. Maybe Retardistan will truly have a new dawn. That'd be nice.
It would be very nice. But today, maybe you've seen this, there would be the inauguration of the president, and he should be announcing who his cabinet would be. And that, my friend, is going to be a great video because the cabinet announcements are probably the most important element of this entire Government of National Unity. So why don't you subscribe to the channel and, you'll be notified once that video is out. Cheers.